Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a true crime story that is, well, it's honestly going to fundamentally change how you look at your next vacation rental. We are breaking down a case that totally challenges our basic expectations of privacy and safety. We're going to look at the anatomy of an absolute nightmare, step by step, and figure out how a perfectly normal getaway turned into a claustrophobic fight for survival. So, if you've ever heard a weird creak in the floorboards at night and just brushed it off, you are definitely going to want to hear this. All right, let's jump right in. We're dropping straight into the middle of a frantic police search. Imagine the scene. Two terrified guests have just called the cops to a remote cabin. The officers show up and they do their due diligence, right? They check every single standard point of entry, every room, every closet, every window, and they find absolutely nothing. No broken glass, no muddy footprints, no forced entry. The officers are literally seconds away from closing their notebooks, writing the whole thing off as a paranoid delusion, and leaving these guests all alone in the woods. But then, the entire investigation pivots just because someone decides to look up. A detective notices this tiny square access panel in the ceiling, and it's just slightly ajar. But here is the detail that immediately hooks us into this high-stakes mystery. They hear the unmistakable, rhythmic sound of human breathing coming from the pitch-black void up there. In that split second, the police realize the threat didn't break into the house. The threat is literally a part of the house. So how on earth did we get to this terrifying standoff? To understand that, we've got a flashback to October 2025. Our guests, Daniel and Emma, had just arrived at this gorgeous, remote forest property. The owner, Michael, drops them off with a big smile, but right before driving away into the trees, he leaves them with this wildly specific, bizarre warning. He says, "Please don't try to open the walls in the upstairs hallway." He even repeats it. Daniel and Emma just laugh it off. They figure, it's probably a quirky warning about old plumbing or fragile drywall. They had absolutely no idea they were getting a literal warning about the nightmares surrounding them. And this really highlights the terrifying contrast between the perfect getaway they thought they booked and the reality they were actually walking into. Instead of deep forests and peaceful isolation, they walked into a masterclass in architectural dread. Instead of privacy, they got hidden peepholes. Instead of modern comforts, they were surrounded by secret narrow tunnels. And instead of having zero neighbors for miles, they had a man physically living inside the walls, just inches away from them.
Which brings us to part one, the escalating midnight clues.
Now, as humans, we are totally wired to rationalize things away, aren't we? A moved toothbrush? You probably just forgot where you put it. A zipped backpack? You must have done it without thinking. But when you start stacking these events together, like groceries being completely rearranged overnight and the undeniable physical evidence of a missing apple found half-eaten in a laundry room that neither of them had even set foot in, those rationalizations completely collapse. It becomes super clear that someone else is interacting with their environment while they sleep.
The exact timeline of these events is absolutely crucial, because this is when Daniel decides to gather hard evidence by setting up a motion camera in the kitchen. At 3:14 a.m., they hear these heavy, deliberate footsteps right above them, literally one step every 5 seconds. Talk about psychological torment. Then, just 3 minutes later at 3:17 a.m., the camera's motion sensor trips in the pitch-black kitchen. And when they review the footage the next morning, they don't see a ghost and they don't see an empty room. They literally see a wooden panel by the refrigerator slide open and a pale human hand reach out.
What plays out on that footage is deeply, deeply disturbing because of how casual it is. They watch this painfully thin man, covered in dirty clothes, with long hair totally hiding his face, just crawl right out of the wall framework. He doesn't look around nervously at all. He confidently opens their fridge, eats their leftover food, drinks straight from their milk bottle, and then seamlessly vanishes back into the architecture of the house. This is it. This is the absolute undeniable proof that sends the panicked couple dialing 911, taking us right back to that police search we started with.
Moving on to part two, the hidden tunnels.
Okay, so once the police see that video, the investigation instantly shifts from a standard perimeter check to basically tearing the architecture apart. An officer taps on the hallway wall and it echoes. It's totally hollow. They pry open a wooden panel and uncover a custom-built reality that is just terrifying. They find this entire network of narrow tunnels, barely wide enough to crawl through, stretching behind almost every single room in the house. But it isn't just a hiding spot, guys. It's a full-blown surveillance hub. They're hidden vents specifically designed to carry sound so this guy could listen to every whisper, and perfectly drilled small peepholes flawlessly disguised behind the decorative woodwork. This house was literally engineered for a predator to watch its prey.
The tension here absolutely skyrockets. Two deputies actually make the call to physically enter these claustrophobic tunnels.
I mean, just imagine the dread of squeezing into a narrow, pitch-black space where the occupant holds literally every tactical advantage. The officers crawl in, and their flashlights just fade away into the suffocating darkness of the walls. Suddenly, a scream shatters the silence of the cabin, and then agonizing, dead silence. This moment puts us right in the shoes of the panicked officers waiting in the main house, not to mention Daniel and Emma. The abstract threat has suddenly become a highly volatile, physical confrontation in a space where the police have zero visibility. Finally, the police radio crackles with static, and a deputy's voice breaks through with this chilling realization. I see him. What follows is a frantic, near-impossible chase through the hidden architecture. Just the sound of heavy boots slamming against thin drywall. One deputy manages to catch a fleeting glimpse of their target, giving us this terrifying profile. We're looking at a male, roughly 50 years old, extremely emaciated with wild, long gray hair. But the scariest part? He knows every single inch of this maze. He knows every blind spot, every exit, every corner. The deputy actually noted that in the brief second his flashlight caught the man's face, the intruder's eyes reflected the beam back like a cornered wild animal, right before he vanished back into the blackness.
Which leads us to part 3, the Watcher's confession.
The frantic chase forces the man upward, leading us right back to our cold open at the attic access panel. Detective Harris, who's leading the backup team, slowly climbs the ladder toward that slightly ajar square in the ceiling. He leads with his flashlight into the pitch-black attic. At first, nothing. But then, cutting through the silence, he hears a raspy whisper right beside him in the dark. "So many visitors." The detective freezes, and the man lunges at him from the shadows. After a violent, thankfully brief struggle, the officers manage to drag the man down into the hallway. And you guys, he is smiling. His psychological justification for all this is so deeply twisted. Sitting in the back of the police cruiser, he confesses, saying, "I never hurt anyone. I only watched. I liked pretending I lived with them." He genuinely believes his actions were completely benign. In his mind, he wasn't a threat. He was just an invisible roommate, feeding off the domestic lives of total strangers to fill some massive, disturbing void in his own head. But the sheer scale of his delusion is what's truly staggering. 15. When police finally dismantled the entire wall network, they found a literal library of handwritten journals hidden away in the insulation. Thousands of pages spanning 15 years. This man had meticulously documented every single guest, every mundane conversation, every couple's argument, every whispered secret, recorded in ink for a decade and a half. Weeks later, the cabin, which is deeply structurally compromised at this point, is rightly scheduled for demolition. But as the construction workers are tearing down the foundational walls, they unearth one last hidden room at the very core of the house. Inside, they find a single chair, an old television, and dozens upon dozens of family photographs meticulously displayed. And here's the kicker. None of those photos belonged to his family. They were all stolen from the luggage of the guests. Inside that subterranean room, surrounded by the stolen memories of every single family that ever rented that cabin, we really see the sheer, horrifying depth of his obsession. Watching strangers had literally become his entire existence. He had completely erased his own life just to silently parasite off the lives of others. Unsurprisingly, Daniel and Emma are totally done with remote cabin rentals for the rest of their lives. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. Are your walls truly empty? This story is a brutal reminder that the scariest things aren't always breaking in from the outside. Sometimes, they've just been waiting for you on the inside the entire time. Keep that in mind the next time you hear a slow, heavy thump in the dark, and try to tell yourself it's just the house settling. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and